everyone, welcome to the Tox Lab. I'm Rebecca.
I'm Rob. Today we're going to be talking about the ONS data for drug-related deaths in 2023, a paper on synthetic or semi-synthetic cannabinoids, and a case series on N-Ethylhexedrone. Before we start, Rebecca, I thought maybe we could have a little banter section.
Always up for the banter.
Why did the toxicologist cross the road?
Got no idea.
To work out the real reason the chicken was dead.
I shouldn't know because that was actually awful.
Let's jump in. Drug-related death statistics, 2023.
What did you want to talk about in relation to this?
That they've been published.
They have been published?
I think last week we talked about the nitazene report, and I think we estimated based on previous years that there'd be about 4,000 drug-related deaths, and I think it's come out a bit higher than that, hasn't it?
So in 2023, there were 93 deaths related to drug poisonings per million people, which was higher than in 2022, which was 84.4 deaths per million people.
Okay, so it's gone up.
Just the standard. So it has gone up.
10% or so?
About that, I think.
Yeah, okay. Quite considerable, really. Yeah, quite considerable increase. We were hoping it might sort of stay level or start dropping, but clearly optimistic.
It's definitely gone up.
So in terms of what this data is, so all cases in which the inquest conclusion was one of drug-related death.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also stats on there that include a breakdown of particular drugs. But, big but, this only includes ones where a specific named drug was listed. So that in itself is perhaps slightly biased data. It won't include, for example, cases whereby the cause of death will be given as multi-drug toxicity. They'll still be included in the overall number of deaths, but not the breakdown.
Yeah. Which is quite interesting in itself. On the same vein as what we talked about last week, the deaths involving opiates, there seems to be a pretty decent increase from 2022 to 2023, which is probably due to
possibly due to novel synthetic opioids. Certainly possible.
But it does look like quite a dramatic increase.
Interesting.
So for any opiate in 2022, there were 39.1 deaths per million people. In 2023, that's gone up to 43.8 deaths per million people.
I notice in this report they do seem to be using the words opiate and opioid interchangeably.
They do, which is frustrating.
A little bit annoying. I've seen a lot of misleading headlines about these stats within the last couple of days.
Yeah.
About the cocaine representation. I've certainly seen big headlines saying cocaine driving, increase in drug-related deaths. And I don't think we can conclude that from this data, because this data literally counts the number of times a drug was listed on a cause of death.
And it might not have been the causative.
Precisely.
Drug involved.
Yeah, exactly. If it was a co-detection along with heroin or a novel opioid, for example.
Which we see as quite a common thing.
A lot. So it isn't necessarily true that cocaine is driving the number to increase. That said, though, the cocaine stats are quite shocking. When you look at that graph, it's just exponentially increasing.
In specifically males, that increase has gone up year on year on year since like 2010. And same is true for females, just not quite as dramatic.
Yeah, it possibly represents just how prevalent cocaine use is within UK culture now, particularly amongst young men, although probably that applies to huge chunks of other demographics as well.
Yeah. You never know, it might be related to how cheap it is and how easy it is to get hold of nowadays.
I'm sure that's the case. The prices of everything over the last few years have gone up thanks to inflation, apart from cocaine, from what I understand. Any other nuggets of information in this report?
There's so much data in this report. I'm trying to see if I can pull up the raw...
Yeah, I've not done a full
data set and see if we can break it down a little bit more.
I've not done an in-depth analysis at this point.
It's interesting the nitazenes they were detecting in this report.
This is 23 data, though,
This is
so
23 data.
early data, and that's probably regional specific. There is a little caveat in there about the novel opioids and how this does differ a bit from the OHID report, because the OHID report reflects a different period and it's a different set of data
This is
collection
true.
as well.
Completely reasonable. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this lot?
Any other interesting graphs? Cannabis flat?
Let me have a look. Yeah, cannabis has remained pretty steady.
Pretty consistent.
Pretty consistent. I feel like, yeah, everything's kind of following the same sort of trend. A couple of little spikes up, but nothing major compared to previous years.
Another point as well is that this data is always... Yeah, this is 2023 data and we're almost in 2025.
Yeah.
So, there is quite a lag. And so who knows whether this trend will continue throughout 2024 or indeed if things are going to get worse.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the nicotines impact those like opioid related deaths in 2024, as we know they've definitely been on the rise.
For sure. The only slightly shocking bit for me, and I need to look into this more, was under the benzodiazepine breakdown. It mentions a few novel benzodiazepines by name, but doesn't mention bromazolam, which I seem as really notably absent, and I'm not sure if there's a reason for that.
No, that is
I need to look into that a bit.
worrying. Maybe it's included in like the regular benzos now because it's so common. I don't know. It'd be interesting to break down those stats a little bit more.
Yeah, we could do a deep
can...
analysis and report back.
Yes.
So we'll turn our attention now to this paper on the emergence of semi-synthetic cannabinoids in cannabis products in eastern Denmark over a 6-year period. That's the title of the article. Why don't you introduce the paper to us, Rebecca?
So in this paper, they were looking at 1,441 items of seized material from 2018 to 2023, analysing them all using GCMS and seeing what sort of semi-synthetic cannabinoids they were seeing, looking at sort of the trends and the changes in the types of semi-synthetic cannabinoids you see across the different materials and across the time frame.
Before we go any further, semi-synthetic cannabinoids.
I'm going to let you explain semi-synthetic cannabinoids.
Fair enough. So semi-synthetic cannabinoids are cannabinoid compounds, so compounds which activate the cannabinoid receptors that were derived from what we call phytocannabinoids, so compounds naturally occurring in cannabis plants, but have been chemically altered. The background to this is that a few years ago, there's been a massive boom in the CBD industry. So cannabidiol as a product or a compound that's seen a lot of use in creams, drinks, oils, tinctures, promoted as a wellness agent, potentially as a cure for all sorts of illnesses. And the evidence is interesting, and there's certainly, I think it's fair to say that there's possibly some merit in it as a compound. But what has happened is, as a result of this huge boom in legal cannabis production to produce CBD, CBD has become abundantly available and abundantly cheap per gram. And therefore it's being used as a synthetic precursor to form these novel semi-synthetic variants, which are then more psychoactive.
So shall I talk through a little bit about the trends in semi-synthetic cannabinoids?
Please do.
That the paper does mention. I have written them down. So the first one that kind of appeared in the US in 2019 was Delta 8 THC. Then we move on to hexahydrocannabinol, so HHC, and you get 2 epimers of that, so you get an R and an S. Then we move on to THCP and HCCP, which have varying side chain lengths. We have H4 CBD, which is a hydrogenated version of CBD.
Any more that maybe we've encountered more recently?
HHCB. So there are like plenty of other ones out there on the market, including HHCB. You can also get like HHC O acetate, which has also been detected in seizures as well. And many more that we're not going to mention in this podcast because there are way too many to name, all with slightly differing structures.
I think this is interesting because it's sort of an emerging novel drug market almost.
Mm.
You know, as countries across the world really start to move towards decriminalisation of cannabis, you're starting to see these novel compounds kind of come along, and in some jurisdictions they're being sold as legal alternatives, and in others there's no control at all because cannabis is legal. And it's a really interesting emerging market. Crucially, I think we don't really know very much about the pharmacology of a lot of these compounds, beyond that we believe they are active at the CB1, CB2 receptors in the same way that THC is.
Yeah. It's been proposed that an increased side chain length of delta-9 THC homologs increases potency, and that the 9R epimers of HHC and HHCP are more potent than the S epimers. But yeah, again, there's not masses of data on those.
Interesting. I mean, potential risk. So we've seen over the years with the fully synthetic cannabinoids, the SCRAs, the synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists, that they have much higher receptor activity than THC. And you see some kind of really awful unintended side effects. They can cause seizures. They can cause quite a lot of severe psychiatric or psychological distress. And therefore, if we're now seeing these phytocannabinoids, which have been modified, that are now more potent, potentially we could be walking into a similar situation.
That's very true.
So let's go back to the paper. What did they actually find when they looked at all of these seizures?
So out of the 1,441 seizures from 2018 to 2023, 15% of them were positive for at least one semi-synthetic cannabinoid. And the proportion of those that are positive increase over time. So obviously 2023, there are more positive seized materials than in 2018 when they started. And the type of semi-synthetic cannabinoid does change over the time period. So delta 8 THC was first seen in Q3 of 2019, then wasn't seen again till Q3 2021. So possibly the pandemic may have played a role in availability and the sorts of materials they were seizing during that time frame. Then it talks about HHC, which was seen in the first quarter of 2021, then again in Q3 2022. And this kind of steadily increases till Q2 2023, where there's a sharp decline seen in Q3 2023. And it became a scheduled drug in Denmark in May 2023. So that's probably the reason for that. And then they've decided not to use HHC in their products and move on to a different semi-synthetic cannabinoid that's not scheduled. You have a thought?
Yeah, I do have a thought. I was actually thinking about what's scheduled and what isn't under UK legislation. My understanding is that this would probably all fall under the Misuse of Drugs Act, but I'm actually not 100% sure.
I can Google it.
I might need to look this up
in a second just to see.
Yeah. My other thought with this paper really was I was staggered at just how prevalent these compounds were, particularly going back a few years. They've only came onto my radar within the last year or two. And, I mean, how many labs out there are testing regularly for semi-synthetic variants of cannabinoids? I can't imagine the answer's very many.
No, I can't imagine there are many.
Possibly labs that are specifically verifying CBD products. But in terms of labs doing biological testing for clinical or forensic use, I can't really... I've no real sense, but I suspect there's quite a few labs that aren't routinely testing for them. My understanding is that there are specific schedules in place for THC, and there is a general prohibition on all compounds derived from cannabis sativa or cannabis indica. And therefore, possibly the semi-synthetics might fall outside that. I mean, they're all covered under the Novel Psychoactive Substances Act if they're psychoactive.
I mean, all I'm bringing up is the specific scheduling of synthetic cannabinoids to Schedule 1, but there's nothing coming up super easily on semi-synthetics. So maybe they're not quite as clearly scheduled.
If you're listening and you know, drop us a comment. Let us know. I'd love to know
It'd be great
what the
to
answer
know.
is. Absolutely.
It'd be really great to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just staggered by the prevalence of these compounds. What was interesting was they were mixed in they weren't just present in what was obviously not cannabis. They were mixed in with phytocannabinoids.
Yeah.
So people are fortifying cannabis products with these compounds. Interestingly, were they mixed in with just CBD? Were they mixed in with other?
So I don't have those stats in front of me at the moment, but I do have the breakdown of the sort of products they were seeing them in overall. So 41% of plant materials were positive for semi-synthetic cannabinoids. Well, no. The items that they seized that were positive, 41% of those plant materials, 27% edibles, 10% were like concentrates or e-cigarettes.
See, what's staggering there is that plant material has a higher positivity rate than edibles or e-cigarettes.
I think they were hypothesising that it's the people are growing like the high CBD strains and then spiking them with semi-synthetics.
Yeah.
As a way of kind of circumventing legislation.
I feel like we need to do this study in the UK. I feel like this possibly...
It would be interesting to see the sort of semi-synthetic cannabinoids we're seeing. I just don't think anyone's collecting the data.
No, they're not.
Of it.
Yeah, I agree.
But it would be interesting to see how this relates and whether we've seen similar trends to what Denmark is seeing or what the US have seen. It's all good data.
Definitely. Any other final thoughts on this paper?
Don't think so. I've got anything else in my notes for this one.
Perfect. I think it was a really nice study. I think it gave me a lot to think about in terms of our scope of analysis and whether we need to think about upping what we're doing in terms of looking for these semi-synthetics and just how many are possibly out there that are flying under the radar.
That's the thing, is with any drug, if you're not looking for it, you're not going to see it. And we could be missing a load of detections in a lot of casework.
Absolutely. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. Should we move on to the other paper?
N-Ethylhexedrone.
N-Ethylhexedrone. This is a case series. It's got a great title, this paper. N-Ethylhexedrone, a very long and bad trip, a case series. I do love a paper with a good name. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I especially love the ones with puns in the title. They just make me smile. All for a good funny title.
So tell us about this.
So in this paper, they looked at 3 different cases where N-Ethylhexedrone was detected in 3 different patients who'd presented to A&E. And they were kind of looking at levels and also focusing on the sorts of metabolites they see and how long those metabolites are detected for. So they detected 4 different metabolites in these cases. So reduced NEH, which is N-Ethylhexedrone, but I'm going to abbreviate it to NEH for ease. Dealkyl NEH, reduced dealkyl NEH, and hydroxy NEH. And all 4 of these metabolites were found at day 1 in all 3 cases in both blood and urine. The hydroxy NEH and the dealkyl NEH were not detectable at day 4, and the reduced dealkyl was detectable at day 10 in blood.
Okay, let's go back to the start. Let's go back to the start.
Yeah.
N-Ethylhexedrone. Mm-hmm. What is N-Ethylhexedrone?
It's a cathinone class stimulant.
Thank you. Thank you.
There we go.
Exactly that. So, cathinones emerged. I should know the exact year cathinones emerged. They emerged in the 2000s.
This one first appeared in Europe in 2016.
Okay.
And was the most prevalent MPS seized in 2017.
Thank you.
According to the US.
That's really helpful.
I'm all for the stats. I have them all written down.
Absolutely. Yeah, so cathinones emerged as an alternative to illicit compounds. It's a stimulant drug, so they were kind of trying to replace amphetamine and cocaine. The most famous, of course, that we've possibly all heard of is methadone or meow meow, MCAT. It's got various names. And that became a big party drug until the Novel Psychoactive Substances Act. Well, it was scheduled as a compound in its own right. It was long before the Novel Psychoactive Substances Act. But when it was scheduled, we then saw this burst of cathinone derivatives, and N-Ethylhexedrone is one of those.
So it was also the 3rd most detectable material in Poland between 2016 and 2022. closely behind delta-9 THC and amphetamine.
And I'm definitely not a scholar of Poland's legal system, but I wonder if perhaps it wasn't scheduled in the same way that
Probably.
a lot of countries don't have a generic ban on psychoactive drugs and therefore do proliferate in the presence of not being scheduled. Cathinones are interesting compounds. They seem to be mostly active at the dopamine receptor and have very dopaminergic-like activity. What's interesting with a few of them, and N-Ethylhexedrone I think is possibly one of them, is that they display activity more akin to MDMA, suggesting some serotoninergic activity. I'm not sure if anybody's done receptor studies on N-Ethylhexedrone. Maybe we could look at that for a future.
They have, actually.
Oh, okay.
So, in the introduction to this paper, in vitro, it's more potent at dopamine transporters and less potent at norepinephrine and serotonin. In terms of like its locomotor activity that they've done in animal studies, it's about as potent as cocaine is, but less potent than methamphetamine.
So we've talked about N-Ethylhexedrone, we've talked about cathinones.
Yes.
Let's talk about this case series. So 3 patients present to hospital. Common signs and symptoms.
I'm actually going to have to look at the paper because I
carry on. That's why it's here.
Skimmed over this. I know they had quite common come down symptoms, which were noted. All 3 of them presented to A&E unconscious. One of them had a seizure. One of them fell into a coma. Yeah, a lot of like confusion and things, which you wouldn't necessarily think.
Quite unwell. I'm not sure if they've touched on this in the paper or not. Do we know when they took the compound compared to
in relation to them turning up
turned up in A&E?
No, I don't think we have.
Because years ago,
nice timings, which is a bit annoying.
Years ago, we had a case series, or I read a case series on N-ethylpentalone, which is similar. And the common feature in all of those cases was individuals took this compound and then were incredibly stimulated, but then actually they couldn't then get to sleep. And actually, by the time they presented to hospital, they'd actually been awake for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, insomnia is one of the listed adverse effects of N-Ethylhexedrone that they've talked about in this paper. It's quite interesting.
Another common feature, I think, was hypothermia. Is that correct?
Yeah, hypothermia is listed as one of their sort of adverse come down effects. They also list disorientation, confusion, low level of consciousness, which seemed to be a feature of all 3 cases. Depression, paranoia, hallucinations, tachycardia. I think it also caused SIADH in one of them. It's quite interesting.
That's why I was sort of alluding to possible MDMA-like activity. Both hypothermia and SIADH are recognised side effects, complications of MDMA use. It's very interesting. I think what's quite interesting about this paper is, as you said in the intro, they then went on to look for metabolites. And a lot of those metabolites are very similar to other cathinone derivatives that have come before N-Ethylhexedrone. And I do wonder if they may possibly be active, and therefore that's possibly why we're seeing this really prolonged toxicity and this insomnia and things like that, because not only have you got the effect of the drug, but you've then got an active breakdown product.
This is true, yeah.
Still causing stimulation and effects.
That's definitely a possibility, and it's also quite tricky analytically because a lot of them are isomers of other sorts of cathinones.
Of course.
And same with the metabolites. So you could be thinking you're looking at one thing when you're actually looking at a metabolite of something else, which just makes the whole thing a little bit more confusing to deal with.
What's the take-home message, other than don't take any N-Ethylhexedrone?
I don't know, what do you think the take-home message is? What's your take-home message from this paper?
I'm not sure. It's a really nice, really nice case series presentation. We've got some interesting data in there in terms of the levels, their mid-microgram kind of concentrations. Should be fairly easy to test for, but also not so high that it therefore suggests possibly quite high or moderate potency. Does it talk about dosing?
It does. So yeah, they mentioned that like 50, 60 milligrams is like the typical dose that people use. And like method of ingestion is like insulfation, smoking, IV injection, kind of varies between users, as most drugs are. For intranasal administration, you kind of get peak effects at 20 to 25 minutes, and effects last like 2 to 3 hours. So a lot of people will then redose, which is obviously where it becomes a little bit more dangerous.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I thought it was a really nice case series, actually, to kind of demonstrate. It gives a lot of information. I'm not sure if we'll ever see N-Ethylhexedrone again. I don't know whether it's still on the radar for people or whether it's a drug that is still out there. This could well be a nice historical review that's never gonna resurface again. But you're always surprised. I think you're always surprised, aren't you, by what does come back
Some
from the
things
past.
do just come back around, or someone's got a stash in a drawer somewhere.
Absolutely.
It doesn't know what it is,
Absolutely.
and then it makes an appearance. But that is the quite fun thing about toxicology at the moment, is that with all these different MPSs, they go away and come back, and you just never really know what you're going to get in any case. So
any final thoughts before we end the episode?
I haven't got any.
I don't think so. I'm sure some more science will come our way soon. Yeah, good. Well, have a great week, everyone. Take care.
And see you next time.
See you next time.